friends. Welcome to episode 3 of Tim's Travails. The topic for today's show is the China factor, also the title of Tim's book. And our topic today is Thomas Moga, who is a pioneer in protecting and enforcing intellectual property rights in China. So the China factor is clearly what we're going to be talking about today. I'm Hope Katz-Gibbs, proud producer of the show on the Incandescent Radio Network and Incandescent TV. And before Tim jumps into the Q&A with Tom, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our guest. He has represented foreign companies in China since the 1980s. He is an experienced patent prosecutor in the mechanical, chemical, biochemical, and pharmaceutical arts and testifies as an expert witness in patent disputes. As an IP portfolio developer, Tom's experience includes the development of domestic and foreign patent portfolios, primarily through the drafting and prosecution of patent applications for filing in the US and abroad. He also oversees a team that specializes in receiving and filing patent applications with the USPTO on behalf of foreign applicants. So I'm so excited to hear this conversation today, you guys. This is awesome. We have some props that are really fascinating. Tom was sharing them with us before we got started. So take it away, Tim.
Well, thank you very much, Hope, and welcome, Tom. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Tim.
And well, today is pretty much a China topic for the two of us to talk about. But just for some people who might have this strange thought about ideas about patent lawyers, I can tell you that Tom probably wouldn't fit the stereotypical thoughts of what people might think of as a patent lawyer. He's certainly well traveled, and I've always been able to lure him into little adventures on the side and doing things that he probably hadn't either thought about or didn't want to do. But I've been successful over the years to get him to travel to a few places, and we've had a good time doing a lot of training and education stuff. The funny thing about that is all of those have occurred not in China, but elsewhere, Eastern Europe and other places. But nevertheless, we both spent a lot of time in China, but my time there doesn't compare to Tom's. Um, and I think one of the things that maybe we've never really talked about, Tom, is I know you went your undergraduate studies with political science, things like that. So how did you get moved to this whole China thing?
Uh, Rice Krispies. And I remember when I was a kid, uh, so my heritage is East European. And my mom was born in what was then Yugoslavia. Went overseas when I was 6 years old for 6 weeks, traveling around with my parents. Took the Orient Express, traveled on the SS United States to get there and get back. And it was, so I got this bug early for being elsewhere. But the fascinating about Far East, I don't really know other than, and I'm not kidding about this, saying Rice Krispies. I would talk to my mom, where's rice from? And she'd describe to me where rice was from. And I thought, well, this would be interesting to see where rice was from one day. I just went from there. So when I was in law school, uh, I took some summer programs in Europe, The Hague at the Hague Academy of International Law, and that was fun. But I hadn't been to Asia at that point. So
Hmm.
this was in the 80s. And I wanted to get to China. But in the early mid 80s, it was not so easy for
Yeah.
Westerners to get there with a great degree of comfort and ease. So next best thing, I ended up in Taipei went there with a couple $100 in my pocket. Had a return trip ticket, open-ended, which you could do back then.
Yeah.
I didn't have a job. I had some fellow from our church who represented a buyer they made aluminum wheels in Taiwan, and he arranged it so that one of his colleagues in Taipei would pick me up from the airport, and he dropped me off at this equivalent to a YMCA, and that was the last I saw the guy. So that was his help to get me there. But next door was TLI, Taiwan Language Institute, and I got a job teaching there. I didn't have a job before I arrived, and then began looking for a job in a law firm, and ended up getting actually two jobs. Now, my original undergrad was English Lit Poli Sci, master's in English Lit. So I was hired not so much for my technical background, but because of my literary background, not just being a native speaker, but having an advanced degree in English. And so I ended up got a job at a patent firm purely by accident. They wanted me to come in and help them turn their Chinese language into colloquial
Mm.
English, their letter writing. And I did that. And as part of that, and I keep in mind, I had no undergraduate courses in intellectual property at all. None. I had no interest.
Right.
The only person I knew in our law school who was definitely going to be a patent attorney did wear a pocket protector. And
Of
I
course.
was thinking that was not my goal in life.
Yeah.
Uh, Great guy. Just we always got along, and I should have realized then that I got along better with him as a technical person than I did a lot of folk. So I ended up in Taipei working for this patent firm, intellectual property firm, and that went from. I told my folks I'd be back at Christmas time. That's all I could tell them because I didn't have any idea. This was October, and I found a job working with this patent firm, and they hired me because of English. And I was working with them, and I read my first patent when I was over there. And as you know, as you may know, patent has all sorts of esoteric, goofy terms that are otherworldly, really in a
Yeah.
whole other language. And I found myself, I just happen to have a red pen here, red marking this whole thing, trying to take this patent technical language and turn it into colloquial English. And I remember I gave it to the boss, and he looks at me and just nice guy, too polite, and said, "Oh well, thank you." And of course, nothing ever became of it because they didn't incorporate the changes. But the story is, it was my first exposure. And I really enjoyed what I was doing. The summer before in
Mm.
the US, before I went over, I was working as a summer associate in a medical malpractice firm, plaintiff side, which is about the worst
Yeah.
existence you could ever have from my perspective. It's necessary and all that. I get it. But it didn't work with my own long-term plans, and so whatever those were. And working in the patent firm, I just felt the opposite. I was helping clients to bring inventions to the market. I was getting involved in licensing, and I really thought it was a very positive experience overall. I thought I should do this, but
Yeah.
of course, I didn't have the technical degree. To be a patent lawyer, you had to have it. So I made the crazy decision of deciding to go back to night school and spent the next 8 years working on my degree in biochemistry. So I could legitimately write an application technically and with a literary background correctly.
Yeah.
So it was that was my introduction to and today I'm proud to say, very proud to say that that law firm that I began working with all those decades ago is still a client. In fact, we just got a new patent application from them a couple of days ago for filing. So those relationships
Yeah.
can be durable, and one of the hallmarks of the relationships in China, the potential for being just that is spectacular.
So you took a little bit of Chinese next door to learn some Chinese?
Well, what happened was when I was in law school, thinking I was going to do something in China eventually, I have no clue what, right? I took some classes my third year at the undergraduate school in Chinese, so I can get some
Hmm.
kind of foundation of this. And so when I finally got there, I'm working, I'm have this living at this YMCA virtual place, and next door was TLI. And we worked out a great deal where they would give me 2 hours of Chinese language instruction, and I would provide 1 hour of English teaching for them. And the ratio was great. They had me working because of the masters. They had me working with some of their better students who, frankly, needed virtually none of my help. I mean, their skill was so good that I thought, you should be doing this actually, not me. They worked for a bank, and all three worked for a bank and management, and it was a great experience. So I did that, and I ended up staying for about a year.
Yeah. So now in Taiwan, of course, weather's pretty warm, can be warm. And then you got a Fulbright to go to mainland China,
Mainland China.
and you were not exactly in the same kind of environment. Would that be correct?
Well, that would be correct. But in that interim, though, my wife and I, this is before children, went to Xiamen University. That was 6 months after Tiananmen. And
Mm.
so this was 1990. And Xiamen was one of the key universities in China. So they were Southeastern University, beautiful location. And they were a site of some of the anti-government activity in '89. And so you could feel that energy when you got there, that the things were still going on, and there was still that we need to do something, we need to change something. I remember one of my students, who actually turned out to be the listener. All of my classes had assigned listeners,
Oh yeah.
and they would report to whomever in my activities. And it turned out to be this one fellow. I knew he was my assigned listener because I would go to the English corner on Friday nights, Did that for a couple times. And the idea was that you would bring your native skills and speak with Chinese students and have a conversation and try and develop their conversational English. And again, keeping in mind, this is not long after Tiananmen. And I was meeting there and I saw one of my graduate students and he was just milling about. And I said hello. And a student unknown to me approached me and started talking to me because he wanted to know about Kent State in the
Oh,
US. And they had heard some things, but not probably everything. And maybe what they had heard was not accurate. But the student, my graduate student, and I didn't know who he was at that. I mean, as a student, I knew who he was, but I didn't know his position relative to the
yeah.
university leadership. He comes between me and this fellow who's asking me this question, and he turns to the fellow and he said, Professor Moga really doesn't want to talk about this. And I said, hey, no problem. I'm good with this, right? I've got this under control. He turns to me and he said, Professor Moga really doesn't want to talk about this. Okay, message received and understood. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And that was the last English corner I ever went to because it really made me aware
Yeah.
of some of the protocols I had missed. But that was in Xiamen, and because of the timing. But that was hot and
Yeah.
humid in Southeast China, and I managed to get tropical typhus when I was there, which is a real interesting aspect of the time spent. But that was a great foundation for everything that followed because Xiamen was clearly over the emperor was over the mountain and far away. It had a very, I don't know, liberal. I remember when government leaders came in. This is back, Tim, you remember back in the day when you would see the Mao jackets every once in a while at formal events, right? And I knew when the leaders were coming into town because the Mao jackets would come out of storage. And there was a lot of they're sweeping up and cleaning up the town, and everything was all polished and ready for show, right? And then you knew when they left
Yeah.
because the jackets went back to the closet, and that was that. And that was again part of the interesting experience. You learned that. The Fulbright, a few years later, was up in the Northeast, up
Mm.
in Changchun, Jilin University, Jida. And that was an entirely different experience. My wife, our kids were born by that time, and our daughter was only one. And had I been posted in Beijing or Shanghai or Guangzhou or someplace where there would have been, this is, I apologize for what appears to be prejudice. It's not. It's just at the time, it seemed like I had to be able to cut this deal with my wife, had American hospitals or British hospitals or
Yeah.
something. And that was a fair concern. Our daughter at that point was not even one, and her immune system hadn't been developed. So we made the difficult decision of my wife and kids staying home while I went on the Fulbright and in the Northeast, and it was pretty bad. I went there in wintertime, and I was there just about the time that Deng Xiaoping passed.
Mm.
And I was actually in Beijing. All the Fulbrighters had been gathered by state in Beijing at the embassy, and we were having these training programs underway about what to say and what not to say. But there was the watch, of course, for Deng Xiaoping's passing. And the embassy had heard from, not from sources in China, but a foreign U.S. embassy, and I want to say it was Denmark or Sweden, some such thing. It was Northwest Europe, and they had heard about his passing, and immediately they said, "All right, very nice seeing you. Everyone's out of here," and we were sent right away to our posts. A couple stayed in Beijing, but most of us were out of Beijing, just because they didn't want to deal with us with all the activity because they didn't know what was going to happen in the transition. This had never happened before, right? And what was going military
Oh,
overtake?
yeah.
Nobody knew what was going to happen. So that was an interesting time to be there. So I ended up in the Northeast, and a lot of anxiety in the Northeast about me being up there. A lot of pressure from the Public Security Bureau. In fact, it got so bad that I ended up spending much of the last couple of months of the Fulbright in Beijing working as a foreign advisor, foreign instructor at the Chinese Patent Office. So,
Mm.
the Public Security Bureau actually did me a huge favor by breathing down my neck as much as they did because it forced me to take another whole view of the Fulbright experience.
Yeah.
And, it was a horrible, wonderful time. Heard my daughter talk for the first time long distance. You don't forget that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
anyway, that was a
No, I think some people, well, most of us when we talk to friends that studied abroad, they usually talk about studying abroad in Europe somewhere.
Right. Right.
You and we both went to Asia, you to China, me to Japan. And what's always interesting to me is this was back in 1978 and 79. And at the time, Tokyo was one of the largest cities in the world. And of course, modernization, they've got bullet trains and they've got all this stuff going on. But if you're a student and you are trying and you have to live on a student budget, which is what we did, what you realize is it's one thing about the image projected outside to the rest of the world, and it's another thing about what's reality on the ground. Because I can tell you that as much as you saw all the technology and everything, and people were aware of in Japan in the late 70s, as they were really jumping up the ladder economically. We had a so-called apartment, shall I call it, which was 100 square feet, or about 110 square feet. We did not have hot running water, and this is in Tokyo.
Wow.
And
Wow.
we also did not have bathing facilities in this 110 square foot apartment. So you still went to the
Oh
neighborhood
my.
bathhouse down the street. So, for you and I mean, I think whether it's Japan, whether it's China, there probably are a lot of similarities there well, for you, I mean, China still wasn't there. I mean, in the
Right.
80s, 90s, they were still, I mean, my first trip to Beijing, I still remember the horse-drawn carts and stuff like that. And traffic was not very heavy at all because it was
Right.
still foot traffic and bicycles. So it's a very different image than if you'd done a year abroad or 6 months studying abroad, say in Europe someplace, certainly Western Europe, which is where most Americans tend to go. But Asia is certainly a whole different experience if you were doing it back then.
It was, and seeing the significant difference. And I don't mean just because years had passed between 7 years had passed between the time I was in Xiamen and the time I was in the Northeast, but the significant difference in cultural attitude. The Northeast was far more conservative.
Hmm.
And that's why the Public Security Bureau was so concerned about me and constantly asking this lady who was the Waiban about my activities up there. And then the capper was when one of the PSB people asked the Waiban because they wanted to talk to me. They wanted to start talking to my students to see what I was doing up there.
Ah,
And you can beat me up. I had my passport. I was going home,
right.
but not my kids.
Yeah.
And because that would stick with them on their resume, and I didn't want that to happen. That's when I talked with, if it rings a bell, Tim, Larry Goffney, who at the time was
Right.
deputy director of PTO,
Yeah.
and he was a friend here from Michigan. And I explained to him my situation, and he was the one who made the arrangement with Ma Lunwan, who at the time was his counterpart of the Chinese Patent Office, back when relations were better, I think,
Hmm.
between the offices. And he arranged me to spend the last couple months as a visiting expert. And so I didn't surrender my time up at Jeddah. I would teach for Thursday and Friday. I teach Thursday afternoon, Friday morning, Friday night. I get in the train, overnight train, head to Beijing, stay in Beijing for a few days at Cultural Affairs Attaché. He had an extra room in the apartment. I stayed at his place, and he wasn't there much. And then, I headed back Wednesday morning just to avoid my students. And I felt badly for them because we used to go out to lunch and I'd take them out and just give them some grub. And I couldn't say anything to them. But I
Yeah.
did ask the Wybon, I don't know if she did anything, but I said, after I leave, could you just do me a favor and let them know I wasn't trying to be rude or disrespectful, but I wanted to protect them. So
Yeah.
I don't know what happened, but it's interesting what you say. When I got there to and keep in mind the Fulbright paid for everything, right? So they were paying the university to have me there. And they were planning on me being there with my wife and my kids. So we had this pretty, pretty large apartment I had. Now this is in the Northeast, so air conditioning was not an issue. It was cold enough, but the coal dust in the air, the sky was yellow, and I was constantly cleaning off my windowsills because dust had
Yep.
accumulated. I finally put tape on there, and I remember one time when I was getting a little fed up with the whole Public Security Bureau thing, breathing down my back. They wanted me to go in and have duplicate X-rays taken, chest X-rays, and I had that all done, of course, before I entered the program. It had to be a requirement for the program, so it was all set. And I refused. I was getting tired of the whole shenanigans. I just refused. And when she came back, I remember one time coming back from teaching, and she was waiting in the courtyard, and we went into the apartment, and I just so Tim, how's everything going? What's going on here? And she said, well, it's about your resume. Okay. And she looks up around the room and she does this, go outside. So we went out to the courtyard and she said, your resume, the PSB.
Oh, and by the way, PSB is Public Security Bureau for in China. So yeah.
They're not your friends, let's put it that way. And the PSB was anxious, was really concerned about that fact that my resume said Taiwan, Republic of China. That just split them up, right? And
Yep.
I told so, and keep in mind, I'm getting just exhausted. I miss my family. I was getting tired of the being pushed around. And I remember talking to the Fulbright people about this, and they said, just push back. They said, we don't need that university. There's a lot of places we can go in the future. Just push back.
Oh
Okay.
wow.
I had the blessing. I did that. That's exactly what I did. So and I said about the resume, I said, so you could put down Kenya. I don't really care what you do there. But he said, what's this? What's this? Tim I knew, but I just wanted her to tell me.
Yeah.
She's like, she's looking at me like, what, you're new, right? And she said, well, your room is bugged. I knew the phone was, and I'd given
Yeah.
that, and I had an emergency phrase to use with my mom, my dad, my wife, if there was a problem. And I paid $500 for a helicopter, to take me out to Tokyo in case there was a problem, emergency medical issue. And she said, oh, your room is bugged. She's, like, don't you know anything? Well, that was all I needed, because after that, I'd get back from class and I would complain to whoever was listening about whatever issue was there du jour. And I would say things like, you'll never get out of the Stone Age until you learn how to drive. I mean, I was so angry about this.
Yeah.
But you see, it was then everything, when they asked me about talking to my kids, that it's done. That's when I made the transition. So I didn't abandon the Fulbright. I didn't want to give them a black eye, the program. But I had a great experience working at the Chinese Patent Office, made some friends for life there.
Yeah.
It was wonderful. So how good things can come out of bad things is a good
Yeah.
example.
Well, and here we are, decades later, you're still doing this kind of work, but it's also expanded into the whole enforcement side of things, which may not have
Yes.
been something on your radar screen back then. So just to do a little bit of a switch, these days, when you look at the samples of things that you are finding that are counterfeit items, do you see this change of China's manufacturing going up the value chain, staying at the low level as well as going up the value chain?
Well, that's interesting. I just happen to have at my arm's length here some samples. I compare having the benefit of having lived in Taipei in the mid 80s and going back since then several times and seeing the changes and the development. Back then, one thing that hasn't changed, back then you could walk around with hundreds of dollars worth of Taipei hanging out of your pockets at 2 in the morning and nobody would touch you.
Yeah.
That's still the same today, by the way. That hasn't changed. But the access back then to counterfeit product in Taipei was one of the law firms. So I worked in a patent firm and then I worked in a trade firm too. Morning was trade firm, afternoon was patent, or the other way around. I don't remember which. But anyway, in the basement of the law firm, in the lower level, not basement, but first level, ground level. And you know how the arrangement was, Tim. There are all these open shops on the first level
Yeah.
all around, and then the offices were on top. And so in the lower level was a bookstore. And pretty much 80% ballpark at least was counterfeit. And I know that because I was on my own. I didn't know anybody there. I mean, I made friends with people, but I did go to buy a copy of the Merck manual just to have it the ready, right? And I'm pretty sure it was not a legitimate copy. But what struck me was over the entranceway was a big banner. It said, "Books purchased in this store are for use in Taiwan only." And it was written in both English, and Chinese. And that was my first lesson in, oh, then that makes it okay. That makes counterfeiting okay. As long as you put a disclaimer like
Yeah,
that, then you're
right.
good. But it was a bit of that mindset, and it was a lack of education, lack of understanding, which has been, Tim, that's a struggle you and I have had for decades to
Yeah.
bring the education up. But has it changed in Taiwan? Yes. You're hard pressed now to go to Taiwan to find counterfeit product on
Yeah.
the street like I could back then. It's really cleaned up, and it's just much more difficult now. Although one thing I do miss back then, they would pay me in Thai baht, and I would convert that to English to US dollars. And and it was not legal to do this, of course, but everyone was doing it. And one of the people in my office, one of the admins, her husband ran one of these stores. And what they were at the time, they were, do you remember the jewelry stores, Tim?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The front was a jewelry store. And you go into the shop and there's 5 or 6 items there, but they weren't in the jewelry business, right? It just was a front for it. And I couldn't resist that. And the woman's name, their English given name at the law firm was Lulu. I'm not making this up, Lulu. So I couldn't resist. When I went to do my currency exchange, they had a little slide door like you see from the gangster movies from the
Yeah.
30s. And I knocked on the door and the slide goes open. I couldn't resist. I said, Lulu sent me. And we conducted business to that point into the exchange of currency. Those are gone now too, because of course
Yeah.
it's freely transferable, but back then it wasn't. So a lot of changes like that. But in the counterfeit front, one of the things I did do when I was in China and the Fulbright, and so this is the late 90s now at the Fulbright, is that I was making one of the reasons PSB was so concerned about me and wanted to know more is I was wandering Jilin looking at stores where they sold counterfeit product.
Yeah.
I just,
I
is
just, yeah,
what does an IP attorney do in China when there's no one else to play with, right? When there's
that's right.
they're going anywhere, it's me. So I'd wander around and I'd know. And so we were north of Shenyang, uh, and that's where the U.S. consulate, one of the U.S. consulates
Mhm.
was in Shenyang. And so I got to know, because I was under his umbrella, the consul general there. And he came up one time to visit with me. And he's driving, the consulate car, or it's being driven for him. I don't remember what it was, but it was clearly not your usual, Volkswagen. I mean, it was a higher end vehicle. And he drives up there and he wants me to take him to the hot spots. Well, what his idea of a hotspot was to show me where the counterfeit product is being sold. And I thought, well, Mr. Wyckoff, thank you very much. If they didn't know before what I
Yeah.
was doing in my spare time, they sure know now. And so that was so I began actually back then
Yeah.
exploring and trying to sort out the whole counterfeit business, and then really began so in the late 90s. And since then, we represent some U.S. law firms that don't have China capacity. We've helped them their clients to enforce. We're in the
Yeah.
middle of 2 or 3 of those right now. And of course, on our own, we are portfolio developing for clients and then enforcing at the same time once the development is in place. But it's critical to get the portfolio right, to
Hmm.
get the enforcement right, because you can make a lot of mistakes,
Yeah.
expensive ones too, in either not getting effective protection or getting the wrong protection.
Well, and I guess one of the things we should point out here is for you to do the enforcement in China, all these companies need to make sure that they have their trademarks registered in China and get their patents in China, because just because you have them in the United States means absolutely nothing if you want to enforce somewhere else.
Exactly right. It's all regional. It's
Yeah.
limited by the area. The only regional patent is in Europe. The only regional trademark is in Europe. There are probably others, I think. Avipo, I
Yeah.
think, has them too. But you're right. There's always this area think, well, I'm trademark protected. I've got a registration in the U.S. And that sounds great. But then when you're dealing with online sales
Yeah.
and product entering into the environment, the customs office can deal with trademark problems, but they can't deal with patent problems. And so you
Right.
do have a lot of challenges there.
Yeah.
But you also need to know about some of the mechanisms available in China, for example, that allow not only goods to be seized at the frontier, but
Right.
at a two-way door. China can also prohibit counterfeit from leaving the country, which
Yes.
is a unique system in the world. And some you educate and teach all of this. So it's a fascinating thing. But we are the greatest challenge right now is making sure that clients get protected, that their patents get granted. We're having some challenges in the Chinese patent office where a lot of US patents are getting invalidated at a kind of an extraordinary number, not just US, but foreign. The pharmaceuticals are particularly experiencing this.
Mm.
We went through it ourselves not long ago with patent applications that were pre-examined and they're being invalidated. And it's really, really getting a concern. But the counterfeit, I don't want to say it's fun because these are people's livelihoods that are being compromised. And in
Yeah.
some situations, people health and safety. Now, this is a counterfeit airbag cover for a steering wheel on a vehicle. And normally your airbag assembly would include your cover, of course, which has a breakaway seam in it, allows the airbag to expand. And of course, the inflator or multiple inflators, sometimes there are 2 or 3 units built into the back of this. And you can see that there's nothing here.
Yeah.
This is being sold on the market as a replacement for the airbag. And so if you're a rebuilder and the airbag deployed, you have to replace it. Well, who's going to know?
Right. Yeah.
To the outside, it looks like you've replaced it. Oh, because the original airbag cover would have split airbags out. Now you're replaced with a nice clean cover, and that's all you've got.
Yeah.
So the autos are challenged. There's counterfeit. I don't want to say irrelevant things. This is an old. I don't think you could find this anymore, but this is one of my
Probably.
favorite examples of a good, bad counterfeit product. This is supposed to be an Adidas product. You could tell that by the tongue has a name
Yeah.
on it. Flashing is pretty awful. I mean, there's all sorts of indicators that this is
Yeah.
just not a quality product. There's virtually no padding in this thing. But my favorite part is the misspelling on the
The
heel.
misspelling from Adidas to Abitus.
So
Yes.
they got that one wrong, and
Yeah.
that's occasionally a giveaway, right?
Right. No,
This is
I
like
will
a
tell you
drama.
one of the more interesting ones we ran across is I can't remember if it was a AA or AAA batteries, and you flipped it over, and on the back is the where's it made and so on, and they had the word China misspelled.
No.
So I thought that was a
That's a
pretty
giveaway.
interesting. Yeah, there's a giveaway. Yeah. So always look on the back, make sure they've spelled the country right. That's usually a hint. If you
To get
can't
it
spell
right.
China, you got a
So
problem.
So the airbag, it's a safety issue, obviously.
Yeah.
This is silly, but it's not a safety issue unless you're running and the whole thing falls apart and you break your leg or something. That could be a problem, I suppose. But this story has always fascinated me, and I don't know the current situation.
Yeah.
But I picked this up in probably in the early 2000s, I would imagine, from a street market. And it was a very, very low price. Somehow the price has been crossed out. I must have done that. I don't know. But the fascinating part about this is the detail of this slot that's been cut into the crystal. Now, somewhere in time, the CD is actually rotated.
Hmm.
But that slot is actually formed also into the edge of the CD. And I bought this at the market for a very low price, and I was wondering about that whole slot thing. I didn't ask him about it, but I learned later why it was available because I thought, well, this is kind of a problem to play this. Well, the customs seizure folk are obligated to destroy counterfeit product.
Yeah.
And by cutting an edge into this crystal and into the outer edge of the CD, mission accomplished. But they destroyed it, in quotes. It gets sold in the secondary market for half the price, a third, whatever it was, and then they use resellers that the street vendors do it. The situation here is that I learned later that unlike an LP, which plays from the outside in, a CD plays from the inside out.
Mm.
And so by damaging the outer rings of a CD, it's still playable. It's still workable. I didn't know that, but I
I
have
didn't. Yeah.
bunch of these samples were all run. Again, I don't know if you'll find these today, but back
Yeah.
then that was an effort by customs to take care of business. But not every product which appears to be counterfeit is counterfeit. Now, you may be familiar with P&G's oil of Olay. Well, I bought this because the title caught my attention. And I thought this is kind of fascinating. So a friend of mine, actually, who was IP counsel at P&G, we traveled part of the AIPLA, American Intellectual Property Law Association. We traveled around, and I was talking with Vlad at one time, and I said, I found this product in China, this oil of Ulan. And he said, no, that's ours. It's yours. It didn't look like yours. He said, no, we did a test run on it and oiled Olay didn't play well, the title,
Mm.
translated into Chinese. So it's not counterfeit. It's genuine. It just appears counterfeit. It's the real deal. Probably
Well,
my
that,
last
yeah,
favorite story about counterfeit P&G. And again, my friend Vlad told me about this. He said when he was working in China, just developing, and the P&G product in China is huge. When we were there in 90 and living at the
yeah,
university, we had access to, I think, what, Tim, maybe 2 channels or something, whatever it was. And P&G heavily advertised on these channels. P&G, and I remember hearing all of that like, 1,000 times. And Vlad had mentioned to me one of the ways that they found about counterfeiting was that, and this is in the South, this is, I want to say Guangzhou,
yeah.
a random purchase was made
Hmm.
of one of their shampoos
Yeah.
off the shelf in whatever, drugstore there was. And P&G got a letter from the testing agency in southern China saying, what is this stuff? It doesn't work. It's taking paint off cars. I'm exaggerating, but whatever it wasn't what it should have been.
Yeah.
P&G had no idea. And it turned out that that was a counterfeit product that had been distributed to many stores in Guangzhou, in Guangdong province. And it explained to Vlad and colleagues why it was that some of the sales were slipping.
Yeah. No, that's right.
I didn't know why.
Yeah. Those are the kinds of things people or even companies aren't usually aware of, and don't want to talk about. Certainly not
Right.
have it put into the mainstream media because it
Right.
scares some consumers away. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, something fun toward the end of this here, because one of the things I found out a couple years ago, we were just chatting, and Tom says to me, I'm the special assistant attorney general for intellectual property for the state of Michigan. And I started laughing. I thought he was making it up. I said, what state has an attorney general for intellectual property? I've never even heard of this thing. And so, well, Tom is for the state of Michigan. He's a special assistant attorney general for intellectual property. So how in the world did that happen?
That's a real. So Dykema, my firm, we have an office in Lansing, and so we have worked with the state government and the AG's office on a number of occasions, and they've had this position for a while. A couple of years ago, I found out that their counsel that they had an outside attorney like me was retiring. And they said, Tom, you should apply for this position. It looks like you've got the international and domestic, you've got all this down, and you've got a good team out here. And so we did that, and I applied for it. And sure enough, they said, "We'll have you do this work." It's been that way for a couple of years now. I interviewed with them. One of my favorite interview stories was during COVID, and I talked with my wife, who had worked in a law firm as a administrative leader. And I said, Debbie, what do you think? I mean, what should I wear? This is virtual. I mean, should I go suit and tie? She said, look, you can never go wrong with a suit and tie. I mean, keep in mind, you're talking with the AG's office, and they're probably fairly cautious and conservative and careful. And she said, if they show up in golf shirts, fine. But don't you show up in a golf shirt and they're in a suit. Anyways, we had the interview, and sure enough, three AGs, assistant AGs were on the call, and they all had golf shirts. But I had my suit and tie. So it worked out. I got the post, so obviously it worked out. So
Obviously, yeah.
we manage various issues, use of the governor's likeness,
Oh, okay.
trademark issues, and
Yeah.
so there are enough issues that come up for us to enforce. And the AG's office has been very creative in terms of giving us some latitude about getting protection on things that most states do not get protection
Hmm.
on.
Well, that's good. It's interesting because I do remember us having that conversation. You said something about it, and I frankly thought you were joking around about things. And so I guess it wasn't a big deal when I said, "Oh, why don't you come on the ITAC?" It's nothing.
Well, they did ask, they did say, Tom, we have to do a background check for you, just make sure there's no bankruptcy in this. And I said, well, with the iTech, I already had some kind of,
Yeah.
security clearance. And the one guy says, well, we're anxious to make sure that you haven't killed anybody. And the other one said, well, at least not in the last 10 years, So I knew right away I could work with these people. It's been a wonderful relationship, really bright, capable group. And they take their role very seriously, and they do what they can to make sure that the state's interests are protected. So
Yeah.
for me, it's an honor to be part of that.
Well, that's great. I mean, it's good stuff. And it's for me, it's been a pleasure because I've been able to rope Tom into applying for things that don't pay him anything. It's always been good, that relationship, whether it's Adalpi, which is a non-governmental organization that we both are part of, but another thing that he does and gives time and doesn't get paid for. And then I roped him into applying to the Industry Trade Advisory Committee for the government, and that's yet another thing he doesn't get paid for. Probably it comes more out of his pocket than anything because he has to travel to DC or whatever. But uh, I find him being part of these things as being very beneficial to us as a group, to the committees over the years, and gives us a chance to get together for whatever reason.
It's an
And so it's
excuse.
been good fun.
Yeah.
Appreciate you taking the time today. I know you've got a client call coming up, so thank you very much for your time today. Again, not paid for, but
No,
anyway,
it's
I might as well keep that whole theme of not paying you for anything going because it's worked out for the last 30 years or so.
I seem to recall, though, that when we first met, you were at PTO.
Yes.
And I remember it because I've got this treatise now. It's still out there, Tim, believe it or not. And I remember I needed some information on some country laws. And I ended up talking with you. That was
Yeah.
a quarter of a century ago, I'm thinking.
Yeah. It's been over there.
But
Yeah.
it's been a
Yeah.
pleasure, and I'm always happy to help out. Never hesitate asking me if, even if it's a low cost, no cost opportunity, don't hesitate, okay?
Well, I'll keep that in mind. So thanks very much.
You're welcome.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank you for
gentlemen.
the
This was
opportunity.
great. We really appreciate you sharing the insights and your history. It's amazing hearing two attorneys talk. It's become a theme for Tim's Travails, the show that we're producing on Incandescent Radio and Incandescent TV. And we look forward to bringing you back again as policies continue to change around the world. So thank you both. Thank you, Tim. I'm Hope Katz-Gibbs, producer of the show. We will see you all next month. Thanks so much.